So I want to just kick this off with a quick introduction. My name is Dulani.
And I'm Ember.
Bree is doing double duty, so she couldn't make it. But we're giving a little tribute to her because she was a major contributor. We're from the customer education team, as you mentioned, Derek, and I'm going to start this with talking a little bit about the way we collect information from different periods of our lives. The learning process matures just as we do. So as a child, knowledge comes as you grow. On through your teenage years, you're an adult-dependent learner. You probably dreamt about being a pilot or a pediatrician, not really knowing about the technical aspects of what it takes to fly a plane, let alone take care of a child. Kathy Sierra, who was mentioned last year, is a speaker and author, often relates the steps of learning to a transformational experience. When you mature to an adult, you can now challenge what's learned or instill bias in what you're learning. I'm not just talking about matriculation. We're talking about learning to advance in your career or to simply become an expert. An example of this transition would be the time when you were learning arithmetic to the time when you started applying all the logic from arithmetic to word problems. This is the moment when things begin to click and you mark this rite of passage. So let's say your world revolves around learning software management practices and systems. You could be a Python developer who needs to keep up with popular frameworks, libraries, and tooling, or maybe a seasoned DevOps engineer realizing that you need to be more security savvy to stay competitive. This transformational journey allows you to harness the magical powers you seek within the Nexus platform. Your admins, security staffers, and developers can work together in the platform to establish a healthy DevSecOps standard. No matter the role, you'll immerse yourself into this world of Nexus. You'll learn about our curated data, which is vital to understanding our vulnerability data. This is the brick and mortar to understanding our series on educational foundations on DevOps and DevSecOps. So why not instill all this foundational and additional subject matter into your own curriculum? So today we're going to talk about some targeted learning models that you can use to accelerate your learning. So this, my friends, is called Nexus World, where your admins, security, and dev teams move along the typical path to become more transformational in each of your specialized areas. So on to the first segment, administrators. So we build software for two types of administrator, one who manages systems and one who manages application security and policies. Overall, the responsibilities will involve people management, system management, and workflow management. So starting with this persona, we're going to take a look at some curriculum models with subject matter that you can adapt from this group, from our giant solar system of educational materials. So let's start with the first model here. Let's say you want to add developer profiles in Nexus repository. So we have this model that may help your team get it on board so they can work effectively with the repository manager. Your admins are going to be challenged with this transformational path to make sure users have the means to access only what they need to be productive and insightful. Now, this first model is repository specific, and it focuses on user management. It's heavily based on role-based access controls. So from the help docs, it's going to consist of content from roles, users, and in many cases, LDAP, all part of the greater security chapter. If you're using LDAP, be sure to review the Realms chapter so you can properly access the repos your teams need. Now, if you want to pilot test a format like Maven or maybe NPM, make sure that NPM Maven Quick Start Guide makes its way into the internal curriculum for this segment. Once you get all your users configured, then you should review the content selector section in the repository management chapter. Selectors are queries that you can apply to repositories in order to fine-tune user access to a specific path. So let's say, for instance, you have developers for both front-end and back-end work. You can write multiple selector expressions to target specific client and server-side applications. Now, of course, the selector won't work unless you apply it to a privilege. So you should also get a copy of the privileges chapter and play around with the privilege types. You can build your own privilege types for selectors, application repository views, or whatever best suits your users and organization. There are a number of privileges already built in the repository manager. But if you need something else, you could create your own custom privileges first, and then work your way through a variety of user management paths, such as delegating functions to your local realms, delegating to format specific repositories defined by selector expressions, or delegating both authentication and authorization to an external server. And lastly, for this model, we created a new guide, the RBAC admin guide, which gives you a bit of a alpha to omega look and guidance on how to put those security layers together. So we recommend that you would include this into this sample. The next model we're going to take a look at speaks to the need for a tidy, well-kept system and network of evolving components. Your admins are going to basically keep the diamonds and throw out all the deposits. I'm talking about storage management. So consider these recommendations to keep a clean house. So first, you want to zero in on the primer for storage management. This sheet answers the why. This guide will also give you a rundown on the repository manager's vital organs, so to speak, such as blob stores, those computer-readable files that identify the contents of your repositories. Additional content gives you some strategic points on how to scale, diversify, and optimize usage of blob stores too. So you're also going to need to know about data directories. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to repository manager directories. The data directory on your running instance or instances of the repository manager contains all the persistent data, configurations, and other information that you'll need to carefully manage just in case you need to relocate or upgrade between repository manager versions. Another critical piece here in this paradigm are scheduled tasks, which are found in the configuration chapter, the help docs. This will help your admins understand some common tasks, such as running dump cycles for old bills and blob stores for during certain times during the day, or fine-tuning your cleanup cycles with policies applied to certain builds, or maybe even backing up your DBs and exporting your blobs to other locations. So now I'm going to switch to a IQ server lifecycle focused model for your security admins, where the goals are to understand security policies and plan workflows to handle risks. So here's a path of materials that you could use to help your admins. So you could start with a page from the Getting Started with IQ Server Remediation. In this guide, you'll learn how to analyze risk factors that may affect the flow of your components that enter the Nexus environment. There's, of course, a ton of other materials that you guys will need to help transform your level of understanding. If this were scholastic study, imagine this as a discipline in policy management. So in the help docs, you'll find content such as component hierarchy and inheritance, application management, which is also targeted to our developers, as you'll learn later, but it doesn't hurt for you to learn. You'll also learn about becoming more meticulous about managing and classifying your applications. And also, this learning track should include some heuristics on setting up policies and learning how to manually and programmatically configure your environment to see what's inside those applications. So next, I'm going to pass it over to Ember. She's going to talk to you about another segment, security engineers.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dulani. So let's switch gears over to a curriculum path focused around security engineers. So software security engineers are generally responsible for security testing software and monitoring information systems for potential risks, security gaps, and suspicious or unsafe activities. Taking a modern DevSecOps approach, security professionals are involved in every step of software development, ensuring that security best practices are being followed. So when implementing the Nexus platform in your organization, security professionals will most likely have an expertise in application security. They'll understand your organization's security risk. They'll define security policy and establish risk mitigation strategies. They'll also empower and train stakeholders to avoid and remediate violations early, and then do things like secure users, repositories, and processes in Repository Manager, and also secure applications to prevent bad agents. So how does the role of security professional fit into the Nexus platform? So I'm going to walk you through an example of how you can customize, again, our educational materials around this role. So starting with Nexus IQ Server, this is basically the policy engine that powers our Nexus firewall and lifecycle solutions. So as a security professional, your main focus with IQ Server will be defining the security policies that allow your team to avoid and remediate violations early in your software development lifecycle. So to get started, the most important thing is to just understand your security risk. Our policy management topic in our Sonatype help docs is a good first step to understanding how IQ Server uses policy to identify and prevent risk associated with open source, third-party, or proprietary components that may enter a repository or exist in an application. Next, it's time to start defining your security policy. So first of all, you can access our help docs again to learn all about the parts of a policy, including the summary, inheritance, constraints, actions, and notifications. IQ Server comes with a set of reference policies that you can use to get started, or if needed, you can create your own. Up to you guys. So once you have those policies in place, the next step would be to establish your risk mitigation strategies and empower developers to remediate violations early. A great resource for this is the IQ Server Remediation Guide. This guide helps lay out a plan to create a remediation process, which is used to reduce business risk within your organization. And then after you complete an application evaluation, a security team can review the reports and evaluate which applications comply or do not comply with all the policies in place. So again, our help documentation includes a ton of information on the application composition report itself. And we also have a new guide on our guide site that's basically walking you through the redesigned report, which is now a policy-centric application report. And this focuses on policy summaries and details that can help you and your team concentrate on remediation and, again, reducing that risk and ensuring you're getting the most out of your implementation of IQ Server. Finally, you'll want to determine how security policies can be maintained. So once you get, one place to get started is the continuous monitoring of applications topic in the help docs. Continuous monitoring lets you use the existing policies with notifications to constantly watch, for example, once a day for new violations at a specific development stage, for example, release. So let's switch over to our Nexus Firewall solution. Blocking bad components with Nexus Firewall directly relates to your security policies in IQ Server. With Firewall, you can easily identify good components from bad components and block the bad ones from entering your Nexus or Artifactory repository through customized policies. So you can learn more about using Firewall with Nexus Repository Manager in the IQ Server help documentation. You'll learn about the integration between Nexus Repo and IQ Server, and which will provide you with access to the detailed repository results, identifying components that represent potential risk to the components and applications. In addition to this repository intelligence, you'll be able to perform a variety of actions based on these results, including the ability to waive violations, which you want to do sort of as the exception, not the rule, of course, but It's an option, and you can also manage things like labels. We also have a Nexus Firewall Quick Start Guide that you can use to try out the associated Nexus Firewall functionality before installing it in your development environment. So now let's switch over to our Nexus Repository Manager solution. So here is where you can manage components, build artifacts, and release candidates across your entire development cycle. Security professionals working with Nexus Repository are responsible for securing users, repositories, and processes in Nexus Repository. They'll also focus on securing applications to prevent bad agents using IQ Server via Nexus Firewall. So if you're a security professional that's new to repository management, we recommend starting with our Repository Management Basics course. So this course provides critical high-level theory, best practice, and practical application. Basically, the concepts behind repository management and the different terminologies related to our Nexus Repository Manager. And then the next course you should check out is our Security Model, Users, Roles, and Privileges course. And that's more of a deep dive into our security modeling, focusing on the administration of users, privileges, and roles. And then finally, for some more in-depth topics, we would suggest looking at our Security Essentials video, which goes over, again, the users, roles, privileges, and then also content selectors and realms. And you can check out our guide on role-based access control, which Dulani already mentioned, which can help enforce RBAC policies among your peers, and also automation tools to provide functionality in security management. And that's basically what we're suggesting for a security personnel path. So next I'm going to jump over and talk about more of a software development focused curriculum path. So first, let's just gain a common understanding of sort of this evolving role of developers right now in software development. So the role of software developers is shifting from a more narrow definition of coder as open source management usage increases and release cycles shorten. I've heard many people state this today in different presentations, but we have the statistic in our State of the Software Supply Chain report that basically says that these days about 80 to 90% of most modern applications are comprised of open source components, which is a huge amount. So with that sort of shift, developers take on additional responsibilities like researching and vetting open source libraries to build in necessary application functionality, pulling in third-party dependencies into builds from a repository manager, assembling and integrating code to achieve software platform business and user requirements, and remediating OSS components and applications that contain security vulnerabilities, licensing risks, or architectural concerns. So then let's talk about how the developer role fits into our Nexus platform, and we'll kind of walk you through a curriculum path here as well. So a good place to start, we think, is our sort of newly emerging educational foundations area. So if you feel like you might need some additional context on how our products fit into the DevOps and DevSecOps landscapes, we'd encourage you to check out articles like What is DevOps and Why DevOps, which discuss some of the common misconceptions around DevOps, and also a business case for fully embracing DevOps in your organization based on some of the latest research from experts in the field. And then in the realm of DevSecOps, which is at the core of our Nexus IQ Server solutions, our What is DevSecOps and Why DevSecOps articles explain that DevSecOps is an extension of DevOps with the goal of building quality in or shifting security left, and then also makes a business case for it with the increasingly sophisticated OSS breaches that are happening today, and also the development cost savings that can come along with it. So let's shift into our Nexus platform products. First, we're going to talk about Nexus Repository Manager, which we already have touched on in the other curriculum path. But again, this is basically your single source of truth for your software parts, like a warehouse for your binaries, build and release candidates. And it can also proxy leading public repositories such as the Central Repository for Java, npmjs.org for JavaScript, and pypy.org for Python. So our beginning developers, new to using Nexus Repository Manager should, again, start with our Repository Management Basics course. That's the conceptual high-level theory. And then our first-time installation and setup course will basically walk you through a proof of concept installation and setup and talk about some of the key features. So if you want to get that up and running right away, we'd suggest walking through that, and that's going to be sort of like your example instance. Now, we also have 2 quick start guides that walk you through the setup if you want to deploy repository on AWS or want to learn how to set up a proxy repository for either Maven or NPM. We have a video tutorial that walks you through that as well. So we'd encourage you to check that out. And then once you have your Nexus repository instance up and running, chances are you'll need some guidance on what's next. So one thing you might try is cutting your teeth by building a sample project with Gradle. We will provide some links to that, to the GitHub repo that has some of those example projects. And you can also check out the Nexus Exchange, which contains a whole bunch of projects that you can experiment with as well. So then the next step on our Nexus platform journey is Nexus IQ Server. And again, this is the policy engine that powers Nexus Firewall and Lifecycle. So with Firewall, we've already mentioned the quick start guide. But again, when you get this set up, it's basically living on top of Nexus repository, right? And it's blocking risky components from even entering into your ecosystem. So it's definitely something recommended to get set up once you have Nexus repo up and running. That's kind of like the next stage to block those from even coming in the first place, so they're not getting pulled in to your builds. So our quick start guides, we have one, if you're using the OSS version of Nexus repo, we have a guide that sort of walks you through that one, and also we have a pro version. And then let's switch over to Nexus Lifecycle. So Lifecycle is our automated open source governance tool. And this is really where you can see that OSS vulnerability intelligence within the context of your application, which is really important for, again, this developer role. So when an application scan is run, whether you're doing it in the UI or through our command line tool or right within your IDE, which is what probably a lot of developers want to do. So you can basically look into your component information panel, and on a sort of component by component basis, you can see the dependencies used, any of the associated security license or architecture risks. If you're using the reference policies, which are basically those default policies built in, you'll see any violations that would occur to those, or if your organization sets up their own, you'll be getting those as well. So just for some context, before you really get into using it though, we have some courses that our e-learning team has created that are specific to the developer role. And the first one is called IQ for Developers 100, which you can find on our learning site. And that's basically, taking you as a developer and showing you where you fit into the Nexus IQ policy process, and then how it improves the quality and security of your work, why you would want to build secure coding practices in. And then our IQ for Developers 101 course describes the concept of organizational policies and how they're used to determine and report vulnerabilities in your components. And then the IQ for Developers 102 course shows you how to get started using Nexus IQ within your IDE. We also have our Nexus Lifecycle Quick Start guides, or just the one guide that provides step-by-step instructions on how to get up and running quickly with Lifecycle. And then, so the next stage, after you've kind of gotten it set up and you've run your first scan, you may feel a little bit overwhelmed with some of the results you're seeing in that report. So a good guide to refer to would be our Getting Started with the IQ Server Remediation Guide, and it sort of gives you a path to begin remediating some of those issues. I'm going to skip over this next one. We've talked about it already. There is this policy-centric application report guide that we talked about for the security role. Check that out. The main thing to note here is that there's some use case videos for developers that are just kind of nice to walk you through how you would start remediating highest offenders in that report. And we're going to leave it there for now. That takes us to the end of the developer-centered path. So Dulani, I'll give it back to you.
All right. So how does all of this come together? Well, the roles and duties of an admin or developer are going to shift. And the educational outcomes will evolve as well. So these sample models that we discussed can be switched up based on the outcomes you expect of these personas. For example, putting this all together, your security engineer may want to start using REST APIs to extract information on policy violations, or your admins may need to be proficient in container management. They might have a working knowledge of Docker, but they may need a strategy to back up on-prem images to a cloud host. Or maybe your security expert wants to share information to the team on app security for NPM registries. Or maybe your lead developer is assigned more responsibilities fielding risk that may affect applications in the development pipeline. So you see, there's no singular path because all of your goals will differ. So we're, in this tableau here, we're taking the micro-learning bits mentioned earlier and interweaving them to a greater curriculum that'll help keep your teams on track to deliver greater outcomes within the Nexus platform. So I'm going to close this out with a peer into Nexus world, as I mentioned earlier. As you start working your way in, you're going to come across a lot of isolated subject matter. And wherever you are in your level of expertise, at first, it may seem like this tangled labyrinth of paths as you go. But as you start infusing those micro-learning models into your team's learning processes, that'll give you the advantage here in this world that we call Nexus. So be mindful of your steps, and of course, find your guiding light among the Sonatype team here so we can help you transform along the way.